Today, what we're going to be talking about is perhaps the fact that you're feeling like a failure and why it probably isn't your fault. So, just to say at the start, this live feed has been inspired by my talk with Joshua Fletcher, author of the book, And How Does That Make You Feel? I've been listening to it today because the interview is coming out on Thursday, the 30th of May, 2024. And I would love it if you tuned into the podcast, into Good Enough Counsellors podcast, and listen to what Josh has got to say on the subject of feeling good enough. Because as many of you who have read the book will know, what Joshua talks about in the book are all those thoughts that we have running through our head when we are in therapy and we're listening to our clients, and we've got all these different voices going on. And often one of those voices can be the voice of the critic telling us we're doing a completely rubbish job and why are we doing it, which is what's going through my head as I'm doing this live feed and trying to think of things as I go. Anyway, what I thought we could talk about today is this feeling of feeling like a failure. And the thought was just sparked off by something that Josh said. And I won't spoil it for you by telling you exactly what he said. You'll have to tune into the podcast for that. But I think it's a really common thing that can happen to us when we are either working as therapists and sitting and listening to clients, or it could be that we feel like this in our marketing. And we get those critical thoughts that go through our head. We notice all our mistakes, we notice all the negative reactions, and we don't notice what is going well. And that's our negativity bias coming out, isn't it? And so why does that happen? Few reasons why. Obviously, it protects us, and from a point of view, it gives us an evolutionary advantage from the point of view of survival. So people who notice threat are more likely to survive that threat. So our brains are beautifully designed to notice threat. And that means they work really hard. They process the noting of that threat really hard, and they probably don't spend quite as much time noticing and processing the positive stuff in our lives. We almost take that for granted, don't we? So that is part of the reason why when we think we might be a failure, it's probably that we are overemphasizing the negative and not really focusing on the positive. And the feelings that we get around the negative can be really strong, can't they? There seems to be so much importance attached to succeeding and not being a failure. And that threat level really rises when we think we're failing, and we get all sort of hot and bothered. And then we're having another conversation in our head, that critical voice that Josh has talked about, where, you know, you're sitting there, you're listening to a client, or you're doing a live feed. I'm using this as a live example, excuse the pun. And you've got this thing going through your head saying, you're not doing this very well, you made a mistake there. And we really notice those things. And when our processing power is being taken up in noticing those things, we don't have that spare capacity to notice the things that we're doing well and to actually say, yeah, that was all right, actually. Get all flustered and scared, and then it just ends up being this negative feedback loop and a downward spiral. And I can see there's some of you watching, so I'm wondering, does that resonate with you? Do you get yourself into one of those really sort of negative spirals where all you notice is the negative rather than the positive? And I think if we move on now, just to think about what the impact is on you of doing that. And I know for me, when I start doing that, I feel miserable. I feel horrible. I feel grumpy. I feel like I'm no good. And the old song, "Why Don't I Just Go and Eat Worms?" comes to mind. It's really demotivating when we just notice the negative, isn't it? And we look at it, we think about it, we ruminate on it, and it goes round and round our head. And before you know it, we're really demotivated. We start procrastinating because we don't want to be a failure. And we lose our courage. We lose that I'm going to give it a go anyway type of energy. And we just want to go into the nearest hole and hide or pull something over our head so that no one can see us. That's what happens when we're focusing on the negative. So what can we do about it? And this is what sparked the thought, which Josh said to me. He said, when he's looking at the book reviews, it's so easy to focus on the one really negative book review rather than the good book reviews. And is that what is happening to you? So let's use social media as an example here. So those of you who are marketing your therapy practice on social media, you might really notice the negative stuff that's said on your page. Hopefully you don't get any negative stuff, but occasionally people will leave really horrible things, or they'll say something, or it might not even be on your social media page. It might be that they say something else, or they laugh, or something, and that's a really hurtful thing to happen. And so what we really need to do in situations like that is to be really kind to ourselves, to acknowledge the way we're feeling, but also challenge it. So I was going through a really sort of negative Nelly moment this morning when I first got up. And I was thinking about all the stuff that I felt bad about. And I realised that I was getting myself into that ruminating state, and that actually what I needed to do was sort of change the subject effectively and think about something else and get me back into work. And I'd be working with my clients, and, am I thinking about that stuff that I was ruminating on? No, it's lifted. Getting my brain to be occupied with something else is really helpful. So that's something you could try. And the other thing you could do is you could actually actively search out the positive. So if it's social media, look for things that are going well about your social media page. So look for all the positive comments, like Josh was saying, looking for the positive reviews. Look for the times where people have been engaging in your posts. Look for the likes. I know we don't want our lives to be governed by likes, but there's ways that people show their appreciation, and that is one of them. So it's all about noticing the positive rather than having this horrible negativity bias where we're sort of just looking at that negative stuff all the time. And I find, I have to do this in other areas of my life as well. So particularly with watching the news, I can easily get pulled down, and I have to wrest my attention away from the news and put it into something positive so that I start to notice the positive. So shift your perspective, look for the clues, look for what is going right. And if you're sort of in a therapy session, that can be things like perhaps the change in your client's body language. You might sort of see things that change as you go through. Does their face change? Is there something different? What's going on? What are the clues that you could look for? Are they perhaps, deep in thought because, they've got something that you've said and they're thinking about it? Or are they beginning to open up a little bit more? Are they responding to something that you've said? So, you can sort of open it up and look for the clues that things might be going a bit better than you expected. But also to remind yourself, and I think this is really, really important, that, you're not going to be perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, but the fact is that we tend to notice our mistakes more than we notice the stuff that we're doing well. So it is worth reminding yourself of that. Okay, I'm going to finish there. Do listen out for Josh's podcast. It's going to come out on Thursday morning, the 30th of May, and you can tune in on the Good Enough Counsellors podcast. It's a lovely interview. You learn so much about Josh, and it was really good fun. We had a lot of laughs together. So I hope you tune in. Bye for now.